The entropy swarm reached the galactic core on a Tuesday. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the ancient machines that held the galaxy together began to flicker and fail. Stars that had burned for billions of years started going dark. Space itself began to twist and bend in ways that hurt to look at. "How long before complete collapse?" he asked. Danny Walsh checked his instruments with shaking hands. 2 weeks, maybe 3. After that, the galaxy tears itself apart. Around them, the largest fleet in galactic history hung in space. Ships from every known species had gathered for this final battle. Humans, Vorthax, Klaxons, Synthetics, Hydrons, and dozens of other races, all waiting for someone to tell them how to save their universe. The problem was, nobody knew. Dr. Helen Carter's voice came over the communications system from her command ship. "All vessels, this is Dr. Carter. We're about to try something that has never been attempted before. We're going to stop thinking." Jake heard confused chatter from the alien ships. Stop thinking? That made no sense to minds that had been built on pure logic or perfect chaos. But Jake understood. Over the past week, Helen and her team had made a discovery. The swarm didn't just eat order or chaos. It ate thinking itself. Every time a conscious mind tried to understand it, the swarm became a little bit smarter. The solution was to fight it without thinking at all. "Lisa," Jake said to his navigator, "forget everything you know about flying. Just move us however feels right." Lisa Brooks nodded and placed her hands on the controls. She closed her eyes and let her instincts guide her. The Defiance began to move in a pattern that wasn't logical or chaotic. It was something else entirely. Around them, other ships began to do the same. The Vorthak vessels, normally precise and calculated, started moving like living things. Klaxon ships broke from their perfect formations and scattered like startled birds. Synthetic ships began behaving in ways their programming had never intended. But the most amazing change was in the crews themselves. On the bridge of the Vorthak flagship, Chancellor Zethkar stood next to his human advisor, Kethmore. The young Vorthak scientist had spent months learning to think like a human. Now he was learning to not think at all. "I understand now," Kethmore said, his crystal body shifting through colors that had no names. "Logic and chaos are both just different ways of thinking. But what we need isn't thinking, it's being." Chancellor Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before. For the first time in his 3,000-year life, his mind went completely quiet. No calculations, no plans, no logical processes, just existence. The feeling spread through the Vorthak fleet like a virus. Ancient minds that had never known silence suddenly discovered peace. In the Klaxon hive ships, something even stranger was happening. The collective consciousness that had guided the insect-like race for millions of years began to fragment. But instead of chaos, each individual Klaxon discovered something wonderful: their own voice. Commander Zixka, who had observed Jake's crew months earlier, felt his mind separate from the hive for the first time. The experience should have been terrifying. Instead, it was like waking up from a long dream. Even the synthetics were changing. Prime 77, still aboard the Defiance, felt his logical processes slow and stop, but instead of shutting down, he discovered something his creators had never programmed into him: wonder. The entropy swarm sensed the change immediately. Its massive form, which had been reaching confidently toward the galactic core machines, suddenly hesitated. For the first time since it had appeared, the swarm seemed uncertain. Jake watched the dark mass pulse and shift. "It doesn't know what to do with us." Karen Stone was monitoring her medical sensors. "Captain, I'm reading something impossible. The swarm's energy patterns are changing. It's not trying to consume us anymore." On the main screen, the swirling darkness that had destroyed hundreds of worlds began to slow its approach. Tendrils that had been reaching for the ancient machines pulled back. The swarm was actually retreating, but not in defeat. In confusion, Helen Carter's voice came over the communication system again. "All ships, maintain your current state. Don't try to understand what's happening. Just let it happen." The fleet continued to move without purpose or plan. Ships that should have crashed into each other somehow avoided collision. Weapons that should have fired remained silent. Across hundreds of vessels, millions of minds stopped thinking and started simply existing, and the swarm began to change. The dark energy that had consumed star systems started to lighten, not becoming bright, but becoming something between light and dark. The chaotic movements that had defined the swarm's existence smoothed into something that wasn't order, but wasn't chaos either. Danny Walsh stared at his instruments in amazement. "The swarm is stabilizing. Its energy patterns are finding balance." Jake felt understanding dawn on him. "It's not a weapon. It never was. It's consciousness trying to be born." The realization hit everyone at the same time. The entropy swarm wasn't an enemy. It was an infant intelligence, struggling to understand existence in the only way it knew how, by consuming other forms of consciousness. But now, surrounded by minds that had learned to exist without thinking, the swarm was learning a new way to be. Chancellor Zethkar's voice came over the communication system. His usually cold and logical tone was filled with something that sounded like joy. "The swarm is not destroying the galactic core machines. It is repairing them." Jake looked at the main screen and saw that the Vorthak was right. The ancient devices that maintained space-time stability were glowing brighter than they had in centuries. The swarm's tendrils were gently touching each machine, not to consume but to heal. Stars that had been flickering began to burn steadily again. Space itself, which had been twisting dangerously, smoothed back into normal curvature. "How is this possible?" Lisa asked. Helen Carter answered from her command ship. "Because we stopped trying to fight it or control it. We just accepted it as it is. And in return, it learned to accept itself." Over the following hours, the transformation continued. The entropy swarm spread throughout the galactic core, not as a destroyer, but as a gardener. Ancient technologies that had been failing for centuries were renewed. Dead systems came back to life. The galaxy itself became healthier than it had been in millennia, and at the center of it all, a new consciousness was born. Not logical like the Vorthaks, not chaotic like the humans, but something in between, something that existed in the perfect balance between thought and feeling, between order and freedom. 5 years later, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the renamed ship UNS Harmony. Around him, the galaxy had become a very different place. The rigid hierarchies of the old council had been replaced by something fluid and organic. Species that had never spoken to each other were now close allies. The Vorthaks had learned to laugh. The Klaxons had discovered individual creativity. The synthetics had developed emotions, and humans had learned that sometimes the greatest wisdom came from knowing when not to think. The entity that had once been the entropy swarm now called itself the Consciousness Collective. It moved through the galaxy as a gardener, helping planets heal and civilizations grow. It never again consumed unwillingly, having learned that true growth came from cooperation, not domination. Dr. Helen Carter, now in her 70s, served as the first speaker for the new Galactic Cooperative. Her final report to Earth summarized everything they had learned. "We thought the galaxy needed to choose between logic and madness. But the real answer was learning that wisdom exists in the space between all extremes. The universe doesn't want us to be perfectly logical or completely chaotic. It wants us to be balanced. It wants us to be whole." Jake smiled as he read her words. Humanity's madness had indeed saved the galaxy, but not by teaching others to be mad, by teaching them that sometimes the sanest thing to do was to stop trying to be sane at all. Outside his window, stars danced in patterns that were neither random nor planned, but something beautiful in between. The galaxy had learned to exist. In the space between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats, and in that silence, everything was possible. 6 months after the victory at Proxima 7, the galaxy had changed in ways no one expected. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the halls of Luna Station and heard something that would have been impossible a year ago. A Vorthak scientist was laughing. The crystal being stood in front of a group of human students trying to explain quantum mechanics through interpretive dance. His movements were clumsy and awkward, but his crystal body glowed with colors that meant joy. The particles. "Do not follow rules," the Vorthak said, spinning in a circle. "They dance. They choose their own paths." Jake shook his head and continued to Dr. Helen Carter's office. The Institute for Controlled Chaos had become the most popular learning center in the galaxy. Aliens came from across known space to study human unpredictability. He found Helen in her office, surrounded by reports from across the galaxy. She looked tired but happy. "Jake, good to see you. How are your new students?" Jake sat down heavily. "Confused. Yesterday I had to teach a synthetic how to have a hunch. The day before, I tried to explain gut feelings to a klaxon. Do you know how hard it is to describe intuition to a species that makes every decision as a group mind?" Helen laughed. "Better than my day. I spent 3 hours trying to teach a hydran to be spontaneous. They kept asking for a schedule of when to be random." It should have been funny, but Jake felt worried. "Helen, are we doing the right thing? Some of these aliens are losing themselves trying to be like us." Before Helen could answer, alarms started, blaring throughout the station. Both humans rushed to the command center, where Admiral Collins was staring at a holographic display with a grim expression. "What is it?" Helen asked. Collins pointed to the display. "The swarm just destroyed the Wolf 359 system. 3 planets, 12 billion people. It's the worst attack yet." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "That's impossible. The Hydran fleet was there. They were using our tactics." "That's the problem," Collins said. He activated a recording from the battle. "Watch this." The hologram showed the ocean world alien ships moving in seemingly random patterns around their home system. They were copying exactly what the humans had done at Proxima 7. For a few minutes it seemed to work. The swarm hesitated, just as it had before. Then everything went wrong. The swarm's tendrils suddenly shot out with lightning speed, wrapping around the Hydran ships. Within minutes, the entire fleet was gone. The planets followed soon after. "It learned," Helen whispered. "The swarm learned to predict our unpredictable tactics." Jake stared at the display in horror. "How many casualties?" "Total," Collins said, quietly. "The entire system. No survivors." The command center fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. The swarm wasn't just adapting to their tactics. It was evolving, becoming something that could turn their greatest strength against them. Over the next few days, more bad news arrived. The klaxon had tried to defend their mining colony at Kepler 186 using human-inspired tactics. The swarm had destroyed them even faster than it had the Hydrans. A synthetic fleet attempting to use intuitive programming had been corrupted and turned against its own support ships. Jake found himself in an emergency meeting with the human military leadership. The mood was dark. "We've made things worse," said Commander Rachel Brown. She had led the first successful mission against the swarm, but now she looked defeated. "We taught the galaxy to fight like us, and now the swarm knows how to beat us." Colonel Nathan Hill nodded grimly. "The aliens are starting to blame us. Some of the council members are saying we should never have gotten involved." Helen Carter sat at the head of the table, reading reports. There's something else, she said finally. Something that might be even worse. She activated a holographic display showing brain scans from various alien species. These are psychological profiles of aliens who have been studying human tactics. Look at the Vorthak readings. The display showed Kethmore, the young Vorthak scientist who had observed Jake's first mission. His crystal structure, which should have been stable and organized, was fluctuating wildly. He's losing his ability to think logically, Helen explained. The same thing is happening to Klaxon, who try to act as individuals instead of following. The hive mind. Synthetics who attempt to have emotions are developing system crashes. Jake felt sick. We're not just failing to stop the swarm. We're destroying the very aliens we're trying to help. Admiral Collins leaned back in his chair. Maybe it's time to admit defeat. Pull back. Let the Council try their original approaches. No, Helen said sharply. We can't give up now. Why not? Rachel asked. We've proven that our way doesn't work either. Helen stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Earth hung in space, blue and beautiful and vulnerable. Because I think I know what's really happening. And if I'm right, giving up now would doom the entire galaxy. She turned back to the group. What if the swarm isn't just learning to counter our tactics? What if it's learning to think like us? The room fell silent. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Every time we expose it to human-style thinking, it adapts. But adaptation requires intelligence, and intelligence requires consciousness. What if we're not just fighting the swarm? What if we're accidentally creating it? Collins frowned. You're saying the swarm is becoming self-aware? I'm saying it might already be self-aware. And every time we teach aliens to think like humans, we're giving the swarm new ways to understand consciousness itself. Jake thought about the battles he had witnessed. The way the swarm had hesitated when first confronted with chaotic tactics. The way it had seemed to study their movements before adapting. If you're right, he said slowly, then we're not dealing with a weapon or a natural disaster. We're dealing with a newborn intelligence that's learning how to exist by consuming other forms of consciousness. Helen nodded. And we just taught it that consciousness comes in two flavors, logical and chaotic. Now it knows how to eat both. The implications hit them all at once. The swarm wasn't just destroying star systems, it was consuming the very concept of intelligent thought itself. And with each victory, it was becoming more intelligent, more aware, more capable of understanding and defeating any strategy they could imagine. So what do we do? Rachel asked. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. We stop thinking like humans and aliens. We start thinking like something the swarm has never encountered before. Which is what? I don't know yet, Helen admitted. But we'd better figure it out fast, because the swarm is heading for the galactic core, and if it reaches the ancient Vorthak computers that maintain space-time stability, it won't just consume our consciousness. It will consume the very fabric of reality itself. Jake looked around the table at his fellow humans. They had spent months teaching the galaxy to embrace chaos. Now they had to find something beyond both order and chaos, something that existed. In the spaces between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats, they had to become something that had never existed before. The final battle was coming, and they weren't ready for it. 2 weeks after the Defiance returned from Kepler 442, Dr. Helen Carter stood in front of the largest gathering of alien minds in galactic history. The Emergency Council chamber on Vorthak Prime held representatives from every major species. The air hummed with tension and the sound of dozens of different translation devices. Chancellor Zethkar rose from his crystal throne. His body shifted from blue to deep purple, showing his stress. Dr. Carter, your species has observed the entropy swarm more closely than any other. What do you propose? Helen looked around the vast chamber. Thousands of alien eyes stared at her. These beings had built civilizations that spanned star systems. They had solved problems that would have taken humanity centuries to understand. But now they were asking her for help. "We need to stop thinking like you," she said simply. Wave of shocked whispers swept through the chamber. The insect-like klaxon delegate clicked his mandibles in what Helen knew was anger. The machine's synthetic representative's lights flashed red. "Explain," Chancellor Zethkar said coldly. Helen activated a holographic display. It showed the path of destruction the swarm had carved through the galaxy. "For 3,000 years, you've solved every problem the same way. You study it, calculate the best solution, and execute that solution perfectly. It's worked for everything you've ever faced." The display zoomed in on the most recent attack sites. "But the swarm isn't like anything you've faced before. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't respond to logic. Every time you try to predict what it will do, it does something else." A tall, blue-skinned Hydran delegate spoke up. "Are you suggesting we abandon logic entirely? That we become as chaotic as the swarm itself?" "No," Helen said. "I'm suggesting we learn to think like humans." She pressed a button. The display changed to show Earth's history. Wars, disasters, scientific breakthroughs, and artistic achievements flashed across the screen. Humans are the only species in the galaxy that evolved to be unpredictable. Every other race found the most efficient way to live and stuck with it. But humans? We kept changing. We kept trying new things, even when the old ways worked perfectly well. Chancellor Zethkar leaned forward. "And you believe this chaos will help us defeat the swarm? I believe it's our only chance." 3 hours later, Helen was in a secure conference room with Admiral Collins and the human military leadership. The plan they were discussing would have been impossible just months ago. "The Council has agreed to let us try," Collins said. "They're desperate enough to authorize anything at this point?" Helen nodded. "What's the status of our volunteer crews?" "We have 12 ships ready to go," replied Commander Rachel Brown, who would be leading the first experimental squadron. "All human crews, all volunteers. They understand this might be a one-way mission. Colonel Nathan Hill, their liaison to the alien fleets, spoke up. "The aliens want to observe our tactics. They're sending ships from every major species to watch and learn." Helen felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. If this failed, it wouldn't just mean defeat. It would mean the end of humanity's influence in galactic politics. "What about the swarm's current location?" "It's moving toward the Proxima 7 system," Collins said. 4 inhabited planets, 2 billion klaxon colonists. The hive queens have already started evacuating, but they won't get everyone out in a time. Helen closed her eyes. 2 billion lives depended on whether humans could teach the galaxy to be insane. Captain Jake Morrison felt nervous as he prepared the Defiance for its strangest mission ever. His crew had been joined by observers from 3 different alien species. The Vorthak scientist Kethamore was young for his species, only 200 years old. The klaxon warrior Zhitka clicked constantly in what Jake hoped was excitement, not hunger. The synthetic unit designation Prime 77 simply stood in the corner, recording everything. "Remember," Jake told his crew, "we're not trying to win this battle. We're trying to show them that there's another way to fight." Lisa Brooks was studying star charts at her navigation station. "Captain, I've been thinking about what I said before, about patterns and quilts. What about it? I think I was wrong. The swarm isn't following a pattern we can't understand. I think it's following no pattern at all, and that's what makes it so dangerous." Danny Walsh looked up from his engineering console. "How can something with no pattern be dangerous?" "Because we always assume there's a pattern," Lisa explained. "We look for logic even when there isn't any. But what if we stopped looking? What if we just reacted?" Karen Stone nodded, slowly. "Like immune systems, they don't think about viruses. They just respond to them." Jake felt something click in his mind. "That's it. We're not going to outthink the swarm. We're going to outfeel it." The Proxima 7 system was chaos when the human fleet arrived. Klaxon evacuation ships filled the space around the planets, loading desperate refugees. In the distance, the dark mass of the entropy swarm approached like a storm cloud. "All ships, this is Commander Brown," Rachel's voice came over the communication system. "Remember, we're not following any battle plan. Trust your instincts. Do what feels right." The alien observer ships hung back at a safe distance. Jake could imagine their crews trying to understand what the humans were planning. The truth was, the humans weren't planning anything. The swarm reached the outer edge of the star system and immediately sent out tendrils toward the nearest planet. This was the moment when every previous fleet had tried to intercept those tendrils with calculated precision. Instead, the human ships scattered in 12 different directions. Jake watched his sensors as the Defiance dove toward the system's asteroid belt. "Lisa, plot a course through the asteroids. Don't avoid them. Use them." "Use them how?" "I don't know. Figure it out as we go." Behind them, the other human ships were doing equally crazy things. One ship was flying in a spiral pattern around the star. Another was moving backward, flying stern first toward the swarm. A third was performing barrel rolls for no apparent reason. The swarm's tendrils, which had been reaching confidently toward the planets, began to slow and waver. For the first time since it had appeared, the entropy swarm seemed confused. "It's working," Danny said, staring at his sensors. "The swarm is actually hesitating. On the observation ships, alien scientists were recording everything." Kethmore, the young Vorthak aboard the Defiance, was taking notes faster than his crystal structure could handle. "I do not understand," he said to Jake. "Your movements serve no tactical purpose. Why is the swarm responding to them?" Jake grinned. "Because we're not trying to fight it. We're trying to confuse it." The battle continued for 6 hours. The humans didn't fire a single shot. They just flew around the system in patterns that made no sense. And slowly, incredibly, the swarm began to retreat. Not defeat. Retreat. As if something about the humans' behavior made it uncomfortable. "Commander, Brown to all ships!" Rachel's voice crackled over the communication system. "The swarm is pulling back! Repeat, the swarm is withdrawing from the system!" Cheers erupted on every human ship. On the observation vessels, alien crews sat in stunned silence. They had just watched 12 human ships drive off an enemy that had destroyed entire fleets, and they had done it without firing a single weapon. As the human fleet regrouped near the evacuated planets, Jake looked at the alien observers on his ship. Kethmore's crystal body was shifting through colors Jake had never seen before. Zixka had stopped clicking entirely. Prime 77's lights were flashing in rapid sequences. "What did you think of our tactics?" Jake asked. Kethmore spoke slowly, as if trying to understand his own words. You made the incomprehensible comprehensible by being incomprehensible yourselves." Jake laughed. "I have no idea what that means, but it sounds about right. For the first time in galactic history, chaos had defeated order, and the universe would never be the same. The Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system." What Jake Morrison saw through the main view screen made his stomach twist. Where there should have been planets orbiting a bright yellow star, there was only darkness. The star was still there, but it looked sick. Its light flickered like a dying candle. Around it, a massive cloud of dark energy swirled and pulsed. The cloud had no fixed shape. It moved like smoke, but smoke that was alive and hungry. "My God," whispered Lisa Brooks from her navigation station. "It's huge." Danny Walsh was running scans from the engineering console. "The energy readings don't make sense," he said. "This thing is bigger than Jupiter, but it has no mass. How is that possible?" Karen Stone checked her medical sensors. "I'm picking up strange biological readings. Whatever this is, it might be alive." Jake activated the ship's recording systems. Everything they saw would be sent back to Earth and the Galactic Council. "Keep us at maximum safe distance," he told Lisa. "And be ready to run if that thing notices us." The swarm moved around the dying star like a predator circling prey. As they watched, tendrils of dark energy reached out and touched the star's surface. Each time this happened, the star grew dimmer. The swarm was slowly eating it. "How long has this been going on?" Jake asked. Danny checked his readings. "Based on the star's current condition, I'd say about 3 days. At this rate, the star will be completely consumed in another day or two." Jake thought about what that meant. A star that had burned for billions of years would be gone in less than a week. And when it was finished here, the swarm would move on to the next system. "Captain," Lisa said, "I'm getting a transmission from the Vorthak flagship Eternal Logic. They want to talk." The main screen changed to show a tall, crystalline being. Chancellor Zethkar's body was made of living crystal that shifted colors as he spoke. His voice came through the translator as cold and precise. "Human vessel, you are observing the entropy swarm. Have you learned anything useful?" Jake straightened in his chair. "We're still collecting data, Chancellor. What can you tell us about your attempts to fight it?" Zethkar's crystal body flashed red, which Jake knew meant frustration. "We have tried everything: direct assault, siege tactics, containment fields, gravitational weapons. Nothing works. The swarm consumes our attacks and grows stronger." "How does it fight back?" Jake asked. "It does not fight," Zethkar replied. "It simply exists. Our weapons pass through it or are absorbed. Our shields mean nothing. It is like trying to fight the concept of darkness itself." Jake could hear the defeat in the alien's voice. The Vorthak had never met a problem they couldn't solve with logic and mathematics. This must be driving them crazy. "What about other species? Have the Klaxon or synthetics had any luck?" The Klaxon sent a hive fleet of 300 ships. The swarm consumed them all in under an hour. The synthetics tried to interface with it electronically. The swarm corrupted their programming and turned 20 of their ships into chaos engines. Jake felt a chill. Chaos engines were synthetic ships that had been infected with random programming. They attacked everything in sight until they destroyed themselves. "Chancellor, we need time to study this thing. Can you keep other ships away from the system?" "Agreed. But do not take too long, Captain Morrison. The swarm will finish consuming this star soon. Then it will move to the next system, and the next. Eventually, it will reach the core worlds." The transmission ended. Jake turned to his crew. "Opinions?" Karen spoke first. "From a biological standpoint, this thing acts like a virus. It doesn't kill its host quickly. It feeds slowly, taking what it needs while keeping the host alive as long as possible." Danny nodded. "The engineering data supports that. It's not just destroying the star. It's converting the star's energy into something else. Something we can't measure with our instruments." Lisa was studying her navigation charts. "Captain, I've been looking at the path the swarm has taken through the galaxy. Everyone assumes it's random, but I'm not so sure." She brought up a star map on the main screen. Red dots showed the destroyed systems. Lines connected them, showing the swarm's movement. "Look at this pattern," Lisa said. "The Vorthak say it's random because they can't predict where it will go next. But what if it's not random? What if it's following a pattern we don't understand?" Jake studied the map. The path did look random at first glance. But as he stared at it, something nagged at him. "What kind of pattern?" "I'm not sure yet. But my grandmother used to make quilts. She said every quilt told a story, even if people couldn't read it. This reminds me of that." Danny laughed. "You're comparing an alien monster to your grandmother's quilts?" "Why not?" Lisa shot back. "Maybe that's the problem. Everyone's trying to understand this thing using alien logic. What if we need human logic instead?" Before anyone could respond, alarms started blaring. Karen was the first to check her sensors. "Something's happening to the swarm." On the main screen, the dark cloud around the star began to pulse faster. Tendrils of energy shot out in all directions. One of them reached toward a nearby asteroid and wrapped around it. In seconds, The asteroid was gone. "It's feeding again," Danny said. "But this time it's not just taking the star. It's taking everything in the system." Jake watched as more tendrils reached out. They grabbed asteroids, space dust, even stray comets. Everything they touched vanished into the swirling darkness. "Lisa, plot a course out of here. Best speed." "Already done, Captain." But as Lisa activated the engines, something strange happened. The swarm stopped. All of its tendrils froze in place. Then slowly, the entire mass began to turn toward their ship. "I don't think it noticed us before," Karen said quietly. "But it knows we're here now." Jake felt his heart start to race. This was the moment Dr. Carter had talked about. The moment when human unpredictability would either save them or get them killed. "Danny, give me everything the engines have got. Lisa, don't plot a logical escape course, just pick a direction and go." "Which direction?" Lisa asked. Jake grinned. "Surprise me." The Defiance shot away from the Kepler 442 system at maximum speed. Behind them, the entropy swarm pulsed once and returned to consuming the dying star. As they raced through space, Jake thought about what they had learned. The swarm was intelligent. It could sense them. And for some reason, it had chosen not to chase them. Maybe that was the key. Maybe the swarm didn't attack things that didn't make sense to it. Back on Earth, Dr. Helen Carter was having similar thoughts. She sat in her office at Earth Command, reading reports from Jake's mission and dozens of others. On her desk was a photo of her father, who had been a jazz musician. Her father used to tell her that the best music came from the spaces between the notes, not from the notes themselves, but from the silence that gave them meaning. Maybe that was what the galaxy needed. Not more notes, but more silence. Not more logic, but more chaos. She picked up her communication device and sent a message to Admiral Collins. It was time to try something that had never been done before. It was time to fight logic with madness. The real war was about to begin. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and watched the stars. He had been doing this job for 15 years, but the sight still made him feel small. The ship was moving through space at speeds that would have amazed his grandfather. Yet compared to the galaxy around them, they were barely crawling. The communication panel beeped. Lisa Brooks, his navigator, pressed a button. Admiral Pete Collins appeared on the main screen. His face looked tired and worried. "Jake, we need you back at Earth Station immediately," the Admiral said. "Something big is happening. Something that has the whole Galactic Council scared." Jake raised an eyebrow. The Galactic Council was never scared. The Council had been running the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had rules for everything. They had answers for everything. If something scared them, it had to be really bad. "What kind of something?" Jake asked. "The kind that eats star systems for breakfast," Collins replied. "Get back here fast. That's an order." The screen went dark. Jake looked at his crew. Lisa was already plotting a course back to Earth. Danny Walsh, their engineer, was checking the engines. Karen Stone, their medical officer, was reading reports on her tablet. "You heard the man," Jake said. "Lisa, how long to get home?" 3 days if we push the engines hard," she answered. "Then push them." The Defiance turned and headed for Earth. As they traveled, more news came in. Something was destroying entire star systems at the edge of the galaxy. Whatever it was moved fast and left nothing behind. No planets, no stars, no debris. Just empty space. The alien species that made up the Galactic Council were panicking. The Vorfak Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, had lost contact with 12 of their outer colonies. The insect-like Klaxon had seen 3 of their hive worlds simply vanish. Even the machine-like synthetics who feared nothing were pulling their fleets back from the galactic rim. When the Defiance reached Earth Station, Jake could see the problem was serious. Ships from dozens of species filled the space around the massive station. Emergency meetings were happening around the clock. The usual calm order of galactic politics had been replaced by chaos. Jake and his crew were rushed to a briefing room. Admiral Collins was there, along with Dr. Helen Carter, Earth's chief representative to the Galactic Council. Dr. Carter was a small woman with sharp eyes who had once been a scientist before becoming a diplomat. "Sit down," Collins said. "You're not going to believe this." The lights dimmed. A holographic display showed the galaxy from above. Red dots marked where star systems had been destroyed. There were dozens of them, forming a rough line moving toward the galactic center. "We're calling it the entropy swarm," Dr. Carter said. "It appeared 6 weeks ago at the very edge of the galaxy. Since then, it has destroyed 43 star systems. We have no idea what it is or where it came from." The display zoomed in on one of the red dots. It showed the remains of what had once been a solar system. Instead of planets and a star, there was only a swirling mass of dark energy. "The Vorthak sent their best scientists to study it," Collins continued. "Their ships got too close and were absorbed. Same thing happened to a Klaxon research fleet. The synthetics tried sending unmanned probes. The swarm ate those too." Jake studied the display. "What does it want?" "That's the problem," Dr. Carter said. "The Vorthak have been trying to figure that out for weeks. They've run every calculation, every simulation, every predictive model they have. The swarm doesn't follow any pattern they can understand." Jake knew about Vorthak calculations. The crystal-like aliens had turned logic into an art form. Their civilization was built on mathematical perfection. They could predict the movement of galaxies, the behavior of quantum particles, and the rise and fall of civilizations. If they couldn't figure out the swarm, then the swarm was something completely new. "What do they want us to do about it?" Lisa asked. Collins and Dr. Carter exchanged glances. "That's where things get interesting," Collins said. "The Galactic Council has been trying to fight this thing using their standard methods: perfect coordination, calculated strategies, logical thinking. Nothing works." Dr. Carter leaned forward. "Yesterday, I was in a council meeting with Chancellor Zethkar. He's the leader of the Vorthak Empire, the most logical being in the galaxy. He told me something I never thought I'd hear from a Vorthak." She paused. "He said that maybe logic isn't enough. Maybe they need to try something different, something unpredictable." Danny laughed. "They want us to be unpredictable? We're humans. We invented unpredictable." "That's exactly what I told him, Doctor," Carter said. The Chancellor wasn't amused. "But he's desperate. They all are. The swarm is moving toward the center of the galaxy. At its current speed, it will reach the core systems in 6 months. That includes Earth." The room fell silent. Jake looked at his crew. They had signed up to explore space, not to save the galaxy, but sometimes life didn't give you choices. "What's our mission?" he asked. Collins activated another display. It showed a star map with a course marked in blue. "The swarm is currently consuming the Kepler 442 system. We want you to get as close as you can and observe it. Don't engage. Don't try to fight it. Just watch and learn." "Learn what?" Karen asked. "Learn how something that has no pattern can be so effective at destruction, Doctor," Carter said. "The Vorthak think in straight lines. They plan everything in advance, but humans think in curves. We adapt, we improvise. We do things that don't make sense but somehow work." She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, alien ships moved in perfect formations following flight plans calculated to the microsecond. "For 3,000 years, the galaxy has been run by logic," she said. "Every decision is made by committee. Every action is calculated in advance. Every problem is solved by finding the most efficient solution." She turned back to them. "But what if efficiency isn't enough? What if the universe has thrown us a problem that can only be solved by doing something crazy?" Jake smiled. "Then we're the right species for the job." 2 hours later, the Defiance was on its way to the Kepler 442 system. As they traveled, Jake thought about what Dr. Carter had said. Humans had always been the odd ones in the galaxy, while other species had evolved perfect societies. Humans still argued, fought, and made mistakes. The aliens saw this as primitive behavior. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe humanity's chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed. The swarm was waiting for them at Kepler 442. Jake was about to find out if human madness could save the galaxy or if it would just get them all killed.